Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the session. This session is on New Asian Economic Order, where the theme of entire conference is about history, the future of history. When it comes to economic aspect, what is interesting in East Asia, especially between Korea, Japan, China, is even though the access to global market and globalizations, the global orientation has been leading these nations out of poverty and deep entry into prosperity, but whether or not it is going to be sustainable is a big question. And in this aspect, while inter-regional trade among three countries has been remaining a steady growth level, but compared to what is happening in NAFTA countries and European Union nations, it is still, very small because, as far as I can recollect data, the EU countries, they're enjoying about 65% of inter-regional trade ratio, while NAFTA countries, they're having about 40%. But between and amongst Korea, Japan, China is remaining 20 or 25%. So that means we have a lot of potential to be improved. Having said that, three countries are facing huge challenge, inside, outside. Number one, within each country, the growing sense of economic nationalism, which I understand export is good, import is bad, and also in the wake of 2008 global financial crisis, each country is pretty much on their own, even though we have G20 framework. So each country, they try to solve their problem on their own. That means institutionalization is very much, something to be made. And also, they are pressured from Western economies, kind of rebalancing the economies, from too much focus on manufacturing powerhouse, something how they can turn around into service centers. And this is related to three countries' very fast speed of aging. Japan was the fastest aging society in the world, but Korea is catching up very rapidly. And within several years down the road, Korea is going to be the most fastest aging society. And China is not going to be alone as well. So because of all these challenges and so on, people around the world, they are eyeing on, very interestingly, what is happening in this region. So that is going to be setting the stage for this session. So this session, we are supposed to discuss about New Asian Economic Order. So that order means, in the light of all these economic realities and future challenges, obstacles, is it really possible three countries somehow overcoming some historical rivalry, adversity, and animosities, if you will, and come up with some sort of comprehensive and very deep economic integration? And as we speak, we have several contending economic architectures, ranging from Trans-Pacific Partnership led by USA. Now Japan is jumping into it, become a whole different new ball game, and Korean government is trying to participate in that negotiation or not. And also Korea and China, the FTA negotiation is speeding up, and also the ASEAN-led so-called Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership negotiation is also underway. So does that mean what is going to happen in these regions? And are these three countries are really able to stand up challenge? So that's for the session. And I will introduce the panelists. We have 4 panelists. And very interestingly, we have somewhat, the pseudo representative, I should say, from the USA, Korea, Japan, and China. The first one, I have James Kim from Asan Institute. And also next to him, we have Dr. Lee from Kiev. Chang, and we have Mr. Shen Minghui from China, and last but not least, we have Terada Takashi from Japan Doshisha University. So as a first rule, I would ask each panelist talk about 5 to 7 minutes about the initial thinking about this issue, and I will go around and perhaps as we move around, we'll allow participation from the floor. Okay, so James Kim, Shirley.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. As the first speaker, I guess I have the task of setting the stage for the other speakers on the panel. though Dr. Choi has done a good job of opening up what some of the key issues are going to be. But I wanted to go a little bit more deeper into the issues that are at hand for us in the panel, according to the panel description. And I'm talking specifically about TPP and RCEP, whether or not these could be the basis for new Asian economic order, whatever that may mean. I want to start off with some caveats. First, it bears mentioning that TPP and RCEP have yet to be finalized. Though if USTR is correct, TPP should have been done last year. I've heard some murmurs in Hanoi last summer when I was there that it'll get done by the July of this year. But with the Democrats in the Senate questioning the merits of TPP, isn't likely that the Obama administration will have fast-track authority until the midterm election's over, which means that TPP might not even be finished by the end of this year, which means next year. So we might say the similar, or say something, reach a similar conclusion when we're talking about RCEP, which some people say will get done by the end of this year. But I just wanted to make it clear to everyone that we're talking about something that doesn't yet exist. Meaning we're speculating here when we're talking about these agreements and what they mean for the region. It could also just as well be that these agreements will take, they can be finished, but it'll take much longer than what many of these, even what I've suggested. It might even go beyond next year. We're just not sure until we see an agreement. The second point to make here is that these agreements are trade agreements, first and foremost. So it's not to say that trade agreements can't have political implications, but the agreements and negotiations are about issues that are closely related to cross-border movement of goods and services. And the third point related to the second one is that these agreements touch on highly technical and difficult issues, all of which we probably won't be going over today in detail. So we're probably going to talk about these agreements from a big picture point of view. So, and that's what I'll be doing for my presentation. So setting the stage for the big picture. So with that said, I think everyone on this panel will agree with Dr. Choi that these agreements are quite important. Just on size alone, we're talking here about a market that consists of about 4 billion consumers if we put TPP and RCEP together, with a GDP of nearly $50 trillion, which will make up about 60% of the world's economy. But if we had to compare between these two, in terms of population size, the 12-nation TPP clearly is smaller with about 800, well, it's, 13-nation if we include Korea, since Korea has expressed an intention to participate, but it's not a participating member yet. Nonetheless, if we include Korea, then it's about 840 million people. 16 RCEP nations, we're talking about 3.4 billion, about 3 to 3.5, 4 times what TPP is in terms of consumer size. If we're talking about the dollars at stake per person, TPP is a little bit larger, the average trade per capita being about $30,000, while that of RCEP being only about 20,000. So RCEP is smaller in terms of dollar value, at present value. That's not to say it can't get larger into the future. The potential is certainly tremendous with 3.4 billion people. So now for the question posed in the panel. Will these frameworks serve as a basis for new Asian economic order? So as you can probably guess based on what I've said, the short answer is we don't know yet. We need a finalized agreement to think about the impact of these agreements. But I guess a more nuanced answer is probably the one that we want, one that requires some thinking, is that we could take a short-term and a long-term perspective on this. So if TPP is what everybody says it is, then in the long run it'll be a trend-setting, quote-unquote, high-quality 21st century trade agreement. As it looks from the outside on how the negotiations are going, the agreement's being negotiated in such ways to allow varying schedule for compliance to account for the differences in the members' level of development. So what this means is that in the short run, the impact is going to be marginal if compliance is going to be phased in. But in the long run, probably the impact is going to be quite significant. RCEP, on the other hand, is being talked about as a vehicle for establishing market access. The scope of coverage is a lot narrower than TPP in the sense that there is yet not as much discussion about issues like government procurement or labor or environment issues as it's being, what the suggestion is that it's being negotiated in TPP. So while RCEP is more likely to encourage trade, my thinking is that its impact in relation to TPP is going to be less trend-setting. Now, in terms of whether or not these will be the basis for new Asian economic order, given that TPP is going to be more trend-setting than RCEP, I would think that TPP would have more impact. But regardless of whether you have RCEP or TPP, I think you can make an argument here that there are some fundamental changes that have already occurred and will continue to occur, which we should not lose sight of. And this is and I would argue this is the real basis of the new Asian economic order. And that is the unleashing of China and India, as well as the further consolidation and development of the neighboring Asian economies. Some estimates that I've seen suggest that China will achieve parity with the US in GDP sometime this decade, probably in 3 years, according to the IMF. Some other estimates I see at 2018. Economists also suggest that the developing Asian economies will overtake the G7 by 2018. And these economies include China, India, Singapore, South Korea, Taiwan, and Hong Kong. So there could indeed be a new order that is centered around Asia, whereby these newly established economies will dictate the terms, the pace, and the manner with which these countries can go about doing their business. And already we're seeing glimpses of what this may mean from China's trade patterns and also her assertiveness in the region. Of course, the question remains whether an international community can guide the regional economies to coordinate how these countries will grow and integrate. And I guess only time will tell.
Thank you. Thank you, James, for setting stage. Now, Dr. Lee.
Okay, as both Dr. Kim and Dr. Choi before him mentioned that there are several very important ongoing FTA negotiations for economic integration in East Asia, namely RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, then China, Japan, Korea FTA, CJK FTA, and Korea-China FTA, and TPP. In my view, they are likely influence each other. They could be complementary to one another, and at the same time, they could compete with one another. Especially, I think the relationship between the TPP and RCEP would be very interesting. But since Dr. Kim already mentioned the issue, maybe for my presentation, let me just focus on the RCEP. As you know, RCEP's target year is 2015, so next year. But so far, earlier this month, fourth round of negotiation took place. So still it's in just the early stage. We haven't really launched the serious negotiation process. But at the same time, RCEP aims to be a comprehensive and high-quality FTA. But RCEP has two main characteristics. One is ASEAN centrality. So RCEP, although from outside, RCEP is considered some kind of, China-led FTA, trade agreement, but it's led by ASEAN. Then we have to consider the fact that there exists huge development gap among the 16 participating countries. So, given these characteristics of RCEP, in my view, it would be very difficult to conclude a comprehensive and high-quality FTA among countries with huge development gaps within a relatively short period of time, namely by the end of next year. But having said that, so I, as someone who have worked hard for the past, almost 10 years on region-wide FTA in East Asia, I've been kind of skeptical about the RCEP. But these days, I've changed my mind. And instead of being, just critical about the process, I'm proposing to the East Asian countries to lower the expectation and to adopt rather a gradual and more realistic approach. So instead of aiming a high quality FTA, comprehensive FTA, maybe we can have a reasonably comprehensive and reasonably high quality FTA. Then maybe we can form an RCEP by the end of next year. If not, maybe in the following year or so. Then we could maybe upgrade the RCEP later. Anyway, but with all those difficulties, and if we manage to overcome those difficulties, and when RCEP is formed, RCEP's economic status would be comparable to those of EU and NAFTA. For instance, in 2012, in terms of GDP, RCEP's share was larger than those of EU and NAFTA. And in terms of trade, their share of RCEP was smaller than EU, but larger than NAFTA. And compared to TPP, in terms of GDP, RCEP's share was smaller than that of TPP, but in terms of trade, its share was a little bit larger than TPP, that of TPP. So when it is formed, it would be kind of comparable to those existing entities like NAFTA and EU, at least in terms of size, and to TPP. Another point I would like to make is that even when it's formed, it would not, it would not replace existing bilateral or plurilateral FTAs. And that means we will have kind of various multi-layered structures of a FTA in East Asia. And in other words, RCEP could be rather symbolic FTA in East Asia. But I mean, when I say it's a symbolic, maybe it's not really important, but in my view, it's quite important, even just symbolic. But anyway, it cannot replace existing bilateral or FTA. So in terms of economic value, it could be limited. Since we are talking about the kind of new economic order, let me just broaden the issue a little bit. As you know, the ASEAN countries work hard to establish ASEAN economic community. Of course, not just economic community, but ASEAN community, including ASEAN economic community, by the end of next year. So, within ASEAN context, when RCEP is formed, it could be, I mean, the ASEAN, for example, the ASEAN economic community could be regarded as some kind of deepening process of AFTA, ASEAN FTA. But when the RCEP is formed, it could be regarded as a kind of enlargement of AFTA. Then, when someday, when East Asian Economic Community is formed, actually East Asian Vision Group 2 proposed the creation of the East Asian Economic Community by 2020, which is not that likely. But anyway, when East Asian Economic Community is formed, it could be an enlargement of ASEAN Economic Community on the one hand, and kind of deepening of RCEP on the other. Let me just stop here.
Well, thank you, Dr. Lee. Perhaps you are not the only skeptical about RCEP in this room. Let's find it out. Okay. Now let's move on to Mr. Shen Minghui from China. Ms. Shen?
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Chair. First, with the rise of China, I just doubt whether there is a new economic order. I don't think so. Although we are now in the negotiation of CJK-FTA and RCEP, however, this kind of proliferation of mega FTAs are triggered by the TPP, especially after the breakdown of WTO Doha round in 2008. We didn't compromise with US at that time. The US began to pursue TPP to make pressure on China, India, maybe, and Brazil to compromise, just like the US did in the Uruguay round. At that time, the US initiated the FTA with Canada and later with Mexico to make pressure or just to push in the EU to make compromise on the WTO round. This time, I think US is still taking the same measures. The second, China now is not a rule maker. Although we talked about the rules making all the time, but China is still a rules taker. As we may find that the templates of the TPP is far more comprehensive than the CJK FTA, or not to mention the RCEP. So as you know, China has changed his attitude towards the two clauses. One is national treatment, the other one is negative list. In the BIT negotiations with the US, under the pressure of the US, the problem is that China is still a rules taker. However, it's becoming more and more hard for China to be persuaded from taking the rules set by ABC, anyone but China. The new regional order is far from being set up yet. After the conclusion of ASEAN-China FTA, there is almost no significant FTA concluded for China since 2008. China is maybe quite reluctant in reality. The real situation is nothing changed. US is still the most important consumer of the Asia's final goods. You know, see, 23% of the Asia's total export is consumed by the US. For EU, that figure is, to my memory, is about 24%. And for Japan, that is 11%. For China, only 7% of the final goods, you know, considering the re-export. So China is by no means a rules maker before its consumption increased. So the conclusion, due to the varying templates of the TPP and RCEP, and considering the reluctance of the China's FTA strategy, so it's hard to imagine these two mega FTAs will emerge into one, wherever we call it, FTA AP or something like that, automatically. It's very hard to imagine that. So to my understanding, after the Sino-US BIT negotiations is concluded, maybe a new compromise may be achieved under the framework of WTO. Maybe that will be a better place for both China and the US to stay together instead of any mega FTAs. That's my personal perspective. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shen. Now let's move to Mr. Takashi. Dr. Takashi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon. Now we are realizing we are talking about so-called regional economic disorder rather than order, with a different regional frameworks for integration, with the different memberships. If we have a different agenda, different rules. So to make the order, we certainly need to consider about how these different frameworks for regional integration can be coalesced or put together. Of course, this is very difficult. Even we are not, particularly myself, it's not able to predict what will be in the future, etc. But in order to do that, probably we can offer some of the ideas. So my probably role is to provide the pros and cons of these different frameworks for regional integration. But Japan's current nation, which have been engaged in all negotiations for three frameworks: CJK for Northeast Asia, RCEP for East Asia, and TPP potentially for FTAP in Asia Pacific. But South Korea announced its intention to participate in last December. But I guess the final participation of South Korea will be made after the current negotiation of TPP is completed. Otherwise, the current negotiation, or even now in Tokyo, the US and the Japanese officials have been engaged in negotiating just one day before President Obama's visit. If South Korea joined now, suddenly the situation would be much more complicated. So I think the current Japan is the only nation doing that. So I think we are in a good position to compare different frameworks for that. Why we are talking about the problems or disorders, particularly from the utilizer's viewpoint, you may hear probably the so-called spaghetti ball effect or noodle ball effect, particularly in terms of the East Asian case. And this terminology is often used for bilateral free trade agreement or FTAs. But 2000 is sort of the year or period of the bilateral FTAs in East Asia. But Korea, China, Japan, and ASEAN, even ASEAN individual member countries, were engaged in completing bilateral FTAs. So in East Asia, we have a quite big noodle or spaghetti plate or bowl. But from utilizer's viewpoint, multinational companies who have a wide range of production networks in this region, which one would be the best means helping to create better quality and better prices to win the competition in international market. Of course, it's very difficult. And now East Asia has joined the so-called regional integration competition era. I don't think that this spaghetti ball or noodle ball effect is not applied to the case of regional integration frameworks. As I mentioned, only bilateral ones. So, but as you see, RCEP, CJK, TPP, they're just doing for their own interests. Again, I think the CJK is quite interesting because, for example, Prime Minister Abe, well, he seems to be not so popular in this room anyway, as far as I hear the session today. But he is working so hard to carry out the number of domestic reforms, including agricultural liberalization, which is sort of untouchable or taboo in the Japanese political history. So this is sort of the way for maintaining the popularity, or at least keeping the public support. And we are not talking about the historical issues and etc. But nevertheless, he's not able to visit South Korea and China yet, despite he already visited more than 30 countries, including all 10 ASEAN member states, within just 1 year. Nevertheless, CJK negotiations for integration have been going on. We had run just last month. And I heard from one of the negotiators in Japan that 3 nations at least have a basic consensus. Negative political impact could be minimized. So this is sort of their own work. In this case, they continue to work on for better economic welfare in the future by completing CJK frameworks for integration. Without which, RCEP cannot be achievable. But TPP is different. TPP is only framework among 3 which could be expandable, which means more open to the newcomers. The Philippines already showed an interest in joining it. Thailand maybe. But RCEP, in order to join it, for example, United States, US needs to have a bilateral FTA with ASEAN first. Otherwise, US cannot be a member of RCEP. CJK, only 3 nations. I don't think North Korea, Taiwan are joining it. So TPP is expanding with a lot of memberships. That could be probably political leverage for moving, as already our colleagues mentioned before, RCEP and CJK. Currently, TPP negotiation has been bogged down. And China, which have been affected by the TPP development, particularly after Japan joining it, and South Korea showed an interest in joining it. But because of bogged down negotiations, China just take a, see what's going on approach. And China's enthusiasm to CJK, as far as I hear, is not so much substantial at the moment. But once TPP is completed, I don't know what's going on this week, Japan over South Korea, China's probably attitude may be changing. I think that's quite significant in terms of, I said in the beginning, creating order, which means combining different frameworks. I don't believe RCEP, TPP can be merged in the near future. It's very different frameworks, even ASEAN centrality issues, America's pushing the 21st century agendas, including the competition policy, which of course involves state-owned enterprises treatment. That's very difficult. Even not only China, even Vietnam, Malaysia as well. But China's participation in TPP, that could be probably making a different story. And probably this is something which we need to look at more carefully, what China is doing to do. And Shanghai Free Trade Zone is a quite interesting case. Even US-China investment treaty based upon negative risk approaches is also quite useful for China to consider more positively join the TPP. So again, TPP is very significant in terms of moving RCEP, CJK, but I think the key issue, key nation is, in this case, China. So this is sort of the way at the moment, from my viewpoint, to move forward the disorder situation to the order situation. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Professor Takashi. This is a take-up on his point, where the situations are changing very fast. Even a year ago, the general consensus among trade people was, in this region, 2 mega FTAs in the competition. One is a TPP led by USA. Another one is RCEP based on ASEAN centrality. But ever since Japanese government decided to jump on this negotiation, also Beijing was very cautiously, strategically re-evaluating the merit of participating in TPP. Looks like it's not competition between TPP on the one hand and versus RCEP on the other hand, but looks like whether or not how effectively TPP can be expanding universe. Well, but even having said that, there are so many obstacles. Number of problems, the USA inside, it is virtually, I'm not going to say impossible, very, very difficult task inside Washington, D.C., whether or not they can negotiate, fast-track authority and so on. And whether or not Obama is strongly in control of his people. And also, as I mentioned, the free trade opening up is not quite welcome domestically these days. So these obstacles. So in this regard, I'm asking each panelist about their view. How do you see this sort of, the classification of issues? Do you see in the future of game is whether or not TPP is going to be expanding naturally? So that means RCEP momentum is going to be very much, winding down. And how do you see it? Let's start with James. Yeah.
Well, I guess one way, if you can, again, was it Niels Bohr who said predictions always difficult, especially of the future? And we're doing a lot of predictions here. And I guess one way we could make predictions about the impact of these agreements and what the benefits are for each of the parties so that they can then get on board is to look at existing FTAs, like NAFTA, for instance. If you look at NAFTA, it has 20 years of history. So what has been the record as far as NAFTA in terms of impact? So in 1993, $290 billion trade between Mexico, Canada, and the United States. 20 years later, 2012, $1.1 trillion of trade between those three countries. U.S. trades more with Mexico and Canada than it does with Japan, South Korea, Brazil, Russia, China, and India combined. Mexican farm exports to the U.S. tripled over the same period, 20 years. This is just, on customs, issue. We're talking about NAFTA. It's a much more narrow kind of an agreement than even TPP, and already the impacts are largely positive. You look at Canada, it has added 4.7 million new jobs associated with NAFTA since 1993. Now, if you extrapolate, TPP actually wants to build on this. So US's approach to TPP is to build on the success of NAFTA to deal with some of these very difficult issues having to do with things like government procurement, intellectual property, labor, and environment. Even though there are side labor accords on NAFTA, they really want to sort of get at this problem to address some of these issues and shortcomings of NAFTA through TPP, which means, based on the track record and what we see in NAFTA past 20 years, seems largely positive for all three parties involved. And I don't see why the expansion of those same principles and ideas in TPP would be a step backward in any way for the parties that are participating in that. Based on, granted, it's a track record that is not an exact mirror image of TPP, but I'm a believer in multilateralism and also free trade. And as a believer, and that's not speaking from the U.S. position on this, that's purely a personal position on this, and I don't see why TPP would be a bad thing for the parties involved. Now, RCEP, as it was pointed out by some of the panelists here already, much narrower. Dr. Lee has gone as far as to say that it's more symbolic than it is trend-setting in many ways, if I quoted you correctly on that. So you can be, I guess, I wasn't as skeptical about RCEP until I went the other way. After you presented, actually, I'm more skeptical about RCEP than I was before your presentation. So that's kind of interesting. We kind of switched positions as you were on this issue. But so going back to your original question, which was looking at these two agreements, whether or not these would have a sort of an expansionary impact that is largely positive for the region. Well, if the payoff is good, it's in the plus side. For TPP, clearly you will have more participants coming into the agreement. But if the agreement doesn't really have much impact, as what some are suggesting about RCEP, then I'm not so sure that would have any kind of measurable or positive impact on the economies that we're talking about.
Okay, let's move on to Dr. Lee. What is your view on this?
Okay, so I used to say that TPP, since it's led by United States, it could be done, concluded earlier than RCEP, which is led by ASEAN. ASEAN is 10 countries. It's not one country, 10 countries. Then there's a kind of rotating system of chairmanship. So this year is chaired by Myanmar. Last year it was Brunei, and 2 years ago it was, it was Cambodia, and next year is Malaysia. Is better, but since with that kind of system, it's going to be very difficult to have a strong leadership, in my view. So, but these days, since I heard many kind of difficulties coming from the TPP side, especially within the United States. For example, both Professor Paul Krugman and Joseph Stiglitz are against TPP because for them, the most important issue right now is inequality issue, not free trade. It seems to me, right? So now I'm, as I told you, I changed my kind of view. Instead of insisting a high-quality FTA, RCEP could be formed by, if not next year, maybe in 2 years. So, but because in RCEP, there is no country who could just insist it should be really high quality. But unlike TPP, which is led by United States, which insists it should be high quality. So it could be kind of more difficult for some countries, like maybe Malaysia, Myanmar, the Vietnam, or even Japan, and even in United States. So I'm not quite sure whether these days, in terms of kind of feasibility or in terms of the conclusion of the FTA, which will come first. So, in my view, since the RCEP has a kind of rather relatively speaking weak leadership, I think a country like China, Japan, and Korea should act more positively, taking some leadership, kind of de facto leadership. Because these three countries represent about more than 70% in terms of GDP. So it has economic clout. But the problem is, once again, the kind of a very unfortunate situation in terms of political relationship, especially between China, Japan, and Korea, Japan these days. But when the political atmosphere improves in the coming years, I think China, Japan, and Korea could take some leadership. And another thing is, I didn't really talk about the CJKFTA. I think in this room, not many people would expect the CJKFTA would be concluded within, let's say, a couple of years. But so far, both RCEP and CJKFTA, we finished just 4th round. But so far, the CJKFTA round of negotiation took place 1 or 2 months before the RCEP. So, I mean, in terms of timing, CJKFTA kind of led the RCEP. And although CJKFTA doesn't have any target year, but RCEP has the target year, the end of next year. So maybe CJKFTA, thanks to the target year of RCEP, could advance in spite of bad political situation among the three countries.
Well, you mentioned target, but it's keep moving, so sort of moving target, and also you very, I should say, the pessimistic about ASEAN centrality, and also you kind of urged the Korea, Japan, and China exercise some sort of trilateral collective leadership, but is it really realistic to expect any collective leadership from those three countries? Not because historical problem or some sort of different problem, but the fact that CJKFTA is ongoing process, and if they're going to exercise their leadership, that means without concluding CJKFTA, they're jumping into RCEP. In terms of sequencing and so on, it is going to create so much difficulties, logistical logjams. So.
Yeah, I mean,
some very short.
Yeah, nobody knows for sure, but my personal view is that China, Japan, and Korea, I mean, leaders of three countries, has some choice. They can, in spite of some political difficulties, they can push forward the CJKFTA. Then they can maybe take a leadership in RCEP, or they can do nothing for the CJKFTA, then they cannot really play any significant role within RCEP either. So in my view, if they are smart enough, they will they will push forward the CJKFTA.
I wish that's smart enough. Yeah. Well, let's move on to Dr. Shen.
Okay. Yeah. The China is still outside TPP negotiation, so it depends on TPP itself's goals. So as I know that the US is very good at the sequential negotiation. That is, once the US-led bilateral FTA is concluded, see that NAFTA or just the US-Israel FTA, then the US always, all time, just put new elements to the WTO round, just like Uruguay round, and it accepts new elements, see TRIPS and TRIMS and GATS. This time, just after the US, Jordan, and the US Singapore FTA, then he still add new elements to the Doha round. Although some of the new topics didn't enter into negotiations, just set up a new working groups. However, he's quite good at this kind of negotiation. This time, as we know that there are almost 26 or 29 chapters in the TPP and templates. Some of them are quite new. Seems that the SME and the development and the safety, not to mention the SOE. So I think that the result, no matter the result of the negotiation of TPP or RCEP, no matter what kind of result it is, the thing matters is the process. If only the process exists, say TPP or TTIP, maybe the developing countries like China, India will feel pressured and to make compromise in the WTO round or something like multilateral negotiation. But if this kind of mega FTA stopped, then maybe the emerging economies will feel free. Oh, that's okay. We never promise again. The situation is okay. We are satisfied. So the problem is the US need something that like TPP. If the TPP maybe failed, another new TPP Pacific Alliance, for example, for instance, will be the carrier for US, then still make pressure on China or India to make liberalization, and especially in the multilateral negotiations. I think that's the point. No matter TPP or RCEP negotiation goes, wherever results, the process matters. Okay.
Thank you. Professor Takashi, you have second chance to elaborate your point. Yeah.
Well, I think the TPP's weakness is sort of RCEP's strength, it seems to me. So it's sort of the compensating with nature. Of course, TPP's weakness is size. It's purely dominated by United States and Japan. Well, from the GDP, putting together, two nations account for more than 90%. And most of the nations in TPP are quite free trade oriented. So when it comes to market access, most of the countries actually reduced quite lower level of tariffs. Just look at Singapore or Brunei. Even Japan, nominal tariff ratio is actually 2%, 2.8 to 9. Even including agriculture, 20%, which is lower than South Korea's case, 50%. But RCEP, most of them developing countries, still maintaining higher tariffs. So in this case, FTA is quite useful, particularly when you have FTA with a country who has higher tariffs, because that could be reduced only for signatories. So in this case, and the countries who join TPP RCEP is in a good position. If TPP's negotiation broke down, probably no future for negotiations, probably we can probably use more energy and resources for RCEP, and vice versa. But RCEP's strength is, again, unlike the case of TPP, market size, scale of economy. India, China. I think the most significant implication of RCEP is the integration of India and China. It's about 25 million population single market if realized. And as ASEAN, Japan, South Korea joined it, it's biggest, by far the biggest single market in the world, excluding the United States. So I'm sure that China is really hoping to utilize politically and for getting some leverage from the United States when it comes to the regional integration frameworks. And another TPP's weakness is too much bilateral, particularly when it comes to market access. It's sort of the bilateral negotiations, not the multilateral negotiations, greatly reducing the significance and the usefulness of the multilateral or regional frameworks. So in the end, we may have 50 or 60 bilateral agreement for market access within TPP. That would be so bad for multinational companies, which I mentioned at the beginning of my presentations. But RCEP, market access negotiation, is multilateral, not bilateral. So in this case, whatever you produce within RCEP nations, you don't need to worry about ROO, rule of origins, which means you can export, even import products without tariffs, theoretically speaking. But TPP, we have different frameworks. So in this case, spaghetti ball effect would be created within TPP. So this is TPP's weakness. And why? Because the US is so much predominant. US still maintains some of the higher tariffs on some key agriculture products, like sugars, if automobiles against Japan. So I have never heard US touching on any sort of concessions, automobile liberalization against the Japanese negotiators. And of course, Australia really hopes to see sugar liberalization in the American market, but America said, no, we are not touching any existing bilateral FTA. Australia, US already had it, excluding sugar completely, permanently. So I think the RCEP should utilize its own significance. This is very much different from TPPs. Then probably nations who realize, like United States, not joining the RCEP, wow, maybe RCEP's significance may be useful for companies. They may probably develop an interest in joining RCEP, and also vice versa. Market, the size on RCEP is quite significant to the US. And sorry, let me finish my minute. TPP expansion, I think let me see a bit different viewpoint. It may be important from a political viewpoint. Obama is visiting Tokyo, Seoul, Kuala Lumpur, and Manila. Of course, Manila is not TPP member countries. I'm not so sure whether the TPP is agenda or not for Mr. Obama's meeting with Mr. Kino. But I'm sure they are talking about more military issues in terms of South China Sea. And US is outside East Asia. But as far as China is maintaining such a nasty attitude towards the small ASEAN member countries in the South China Sea, America is more urged to do something, not directly. So what the US can do in this case? Probably to have closer relationships with the nations involved in the South China Sea issues, not only politically, strategically, but also economically. That's why I mentioned the Philippines' interest in TPP in my talk. And this is primarily driven by political and strategic interest. And if those kind of nations increased, US needed to make some concessions in terms of the TPP negotiations. Otherwise, those kind of countries couldn't join the TPP. So I think it's very complicated. Politics and security issues have been also engaged. And we probably needed to see the regional economic order, but of course we needed to have a look at such a political strategic element. Otherwise, it's very difficult to see the future of the regional economic order too.
Yeah, well, before I go to the flow for the questions, let's go one more round. I will ask very quick questions. So in the light of discussion we're having this afternoon, even though there's some desirable path or desirable form of economic new order, it looks like there will be inevitable long delay, a lot of frustration will take many years to reach that goal. So then what is the implication of the status quo? What is the implication of business as usual? What is the implication to each sovereign nation, each business? So perhaps you can touch on this issue very briefly, just one or 2 minutes.
Yeah, this was my point towards the end of the presentation. Fact of the matter is, China and India is now a force to be reckoned with. The robust growth of the neighboring Asian countries that are riding the Chinese wave, it's another fact to contend with. So with or without RCEP or TPP, this is a reality that we need to live with. And really, what these agreements are, in my view, is a way to harness that growth in a way that is positive for not only those countries and only certain select countries if they're successful in negotiating bilateral agreements, but for all the countries in the region that are engaged in these negotiations, as well as countries outside of the region who have a vested interest in their trade relations with these countries.
Okay. Dr. Lee?
Okay, so still, East Asia lags far behind other major regions like, North America or Europe in terms of economic regionalism. But just 10 years ago, in East Asia, we had only AFTA among, FTA among, kind of low-level FTA among the ASEAN countries. But so now we have ASEAN, 5 ASEAN plus 1 FTAs. ASEAN formed FTAs with China, Japan, Korea, and India, Australia, and New Zealand. So now, within East Asia, what we need is, if we manage to form an FTA among the ASEAN, 6 ASEAN FTA partners, basically we will have a kind of FTAs, bilateral FTAs among East Asian countries. So in my view, although I'm kind of skeptical about the high quality FTA, RCEP within a short period of time, but it's not out of reach. I think, if not, next year, maybe within several years, we can form some kind of FTA. But unfortunately, since I'm an economist, I want to have a high-quality FTA in terms of liberalization. But the reality dictates that it cannot be done. So we'll have some kind of not high level, but reasonably high level FTA within several years, in my view.
You're still hopeful. Okay, yeah. Dr. Shen. Yeah.
Okay, what I want to address is FTA useful? According to the survey, China's bilateral FTA the utilization of the China's FTA is fairly low. The highest ASEAN and China FTA utilization rate is about 29%. That means 29 firms of the 100 firms use the preferential tariff of FTA once or more. So the FTA's experience is not so good. But compared with the WTO, we always use MFN all the time. So what we did the FTA for? For what? So the next step, maybe for the China, we need to handle with the business cost firstly, just like Takashi says. We need to handle with the scalable effect and try to reduce the business cost. The logistics cost, including the business cost of using a FTA, is fairly high in China. That accounts for more than 18% of the GDP in 2011, 2012, and 2013. So we got to deal with this kind of real or authentic problems. So that's why I feel very glad to see TPP goes well, because they will make pressure on the government to make liberalization. We need to, especially from the firm's perspective, we need to handle with this kind of problems. And the new reforms need to handle this. For example, the regulation, deregulation, and try to break up the inner problems, including the logistics cost. So the real situation is we need pressure, maybe. So
okay.
That's it.
Well, one of the most important status quo implications, in my view, to link the regional integration agenda to domestic economic reforms. And as I mentioned in my presentations, now Japan is considering first time in history touching on some agricultural liberalizations. For example, fisheries. Just because of the TPP negotiations, Japan is thinking of removing almost all tariffs on fisheries, despite the fact that South Korea had long requested Japan to remove the tariffs on seaweed, for example, this kind of stuff. But Japan said yes, because of TPP. Even the first time, I think, Japanese government tried to touch into the so-called agricultural cooperation. This is now sort of the political lobbying machine over the last 4 decades. But sort of the organizational reforms should be carried out. This is sort of what Mr. Abe or Abe government wants to do, so that the more political or farmers' influence in politics or particular elections could be reduced, so that we can probably introduce the more reforms, like, for example, corporations or companies should be also allowed to join the rice production systems and etc. So that the Japanese agriculture, particularly rice, could be more internationally competitive. But this is one case. We have quite a lot of issues, even the government procurement, for example. This is also true with the United States, particularly in local government levels. So, so we should be be careful about what sort of agendas we are negotiating in international situations. and how it can be probably impacting some domestic economy or even political reforms. And this is something important for China, obviously, and because China's economy is so huge, and every reform have impact on neighboring countries like Korea and Japan.
Thank you. I think we have about 7 minutes left, so I'd like to open the floor for the questions. Anyone who wishing to raise questions, please ask for Mike, and Mike will find you. And please state your name and to whom the question is going to be addressed. Anyone? Gentleman over there, yeah.
Yes, François Godemont from the ECFR. Since there is no question, I'm not a trade specialist, and I think that's why some of us are shutting up, because it's a highly interesting debate, but we are more on the receiving end. I'd like to ask you, because what I've taken from this conversation is the sort of downgrading of FTAs, highlighting TPP as really a substitute for multilateral trade negotiations. In Europe, when we look at these FTAs, we tend to speak of shallow versus deeper FTAs. That is, we tend to grade them differently. And I wonder how do you grade the FTAs that Europe has started, the one with Korea, which is signed, the one which is underway in Japan, which in Brussels they would tend to call a mega FTA by itself, since there is a war on statistics on who is the bigger, EU plus Japan, of course, it's a lot of GDP. But how do you grade? I mean, are we talking about 2 different types of FTAs really under one name? That's something I would ask you.
Thank you. Anyone? Perhaps you could collect 1 or 2 more questions before you go to panelists. Anyone? Okay, yeah. Gentleman sitting over here.
Jebam Kim from Korean American Association. As a layman in economics, perhaps I can exercise some political imagination of the implication from multilateral efforts, particularly the CJK, which one of you mentioned that there is no possibility for Taiwan and North Korea to join in. What could be, if this kind of regional economic integration go further ahead, what kind of political implication can we imagine? For instance, we experienced and witnessed the German reunification, which was accomplished within the framework of larger European integration. So if Taiwan or North Korea are not ready yet, then maybe we can facilitate further the speed of negotiation among the 3 northeastern countries, so that North Korea at least will be encircled in the integrated Northeast Asia. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So who is willing to respond to the first question, grading the FTA, the shallow and deep? I think Dr. Lee should respond at first, and then go to Professor Takashi. Okay. Dr. Lee?
Oh,
yeah.
I was looking
you
for
have a microphone with you.
Yeah. Still, I'm living in the old age. Sorry. I think, for example, in East Asia, when I talk about the RCEP, I propose to kind of lower our expectation. That is, I think that matches your definition of shallow economic integration or FTA. But when you talk about one region where countries like Cambodia or Myanmar, there's the GNI per capita is still under $1,000, and they don't know what to develop for their countries in terms of industry. It's very difficult to be to talk about the high quality FTA. So, I mean, in East Asia, of course, Korea as a country, we formed an FTA with the United States as well as the EU. So we can have a kind of high quality FTA, but regional-wide FTA in East Asia could not be that high. I think it could be slow. Then, can I just respond to the gentleman's
second question? Yes.
question about the possibility of accepting the North Korea and Taiwan? I think that is one of the reasons why we do need some kind of regional FTA, not just bilateral FTA. For example, if CJK FTA is formed, then whenever the other countries or regions are ready to join, they can join. But bilateral FTA is not that easy. So, but a trilateral FTA, like CJK FTA or RCEP, could, I think, have that kind of possibility. So I think especially CJK FTA, when it's formed, it could produce a lot of economic benefits, but also it could reduce political tension in the region.
Yeah, Professor Takashi.
Yeah, thank you very much for raising the EU's influence in East Asia. I think EU-Japan FTA or EPA it's quite significant, and because it seems to me EU-Japan EPA is tougher than TPP, not because agriculture, but because of the EU's pushing sort of standardization of the EU rules to Japan, like for example, automobiles, the safety standard, or pharmaceutical safety systems, which is much actually shorter than the current Japanese ones. And the point is whether Japanese government can accept these kind of the European-based standards or not. Therefore, when I read first time in a newspaper article on EU's demands on Japan through the EPA, wow, it's sort of the international agenda for the negotiations, but it's what's done obviously in Europe, but it's not in East Asia. So in this case, the Europe probably tried to bring, initially with the Korea, I think Korea accepted some of the European standards already to the Japanese cases. Well, I don't know, but EU had a better position because Korea, EU started first, and automobile and electric, particularly flat TVs, tariffs will be removed soon. That's a competing product to EU between Japan and South Korea. So to avoid such kind of disadvantaged positions for Japanese manufacturers, I think Japan needed to accept some of the EU demands. And also this should be also understood in the context of the Americans also, EU FTA or TTIP, US have been engaged in negotiations for FTAs, Japan EU FTAs, and the TPP Japan US FTAs. If all of them done, suddenly because of the OECD FTA could be formulated in the globe. That would be probably bad for some of the nations like India, China, even Brazil, other the developing or emerging economies. So it's still sort of the competition among status quo countries and emerging economies. So in this case, EU-Japan FTA, it's sort of the litmus test for sort of the whether EU or American type of the standardization could be applied to or introduced to the East Asia or not. So I'm looking forward to the EU's final result on the Japanese, the submission of the items. Just quickly, because I mentioned North Korea, Taiwan's inability to join the CJK, well, it may be. So I'm not a specialist on North Korea. So let me say Taiwan's. I first time went to Taiwan last year on regional integration conference. Again, July, I just got the invitation for joining again. So it means Taiwan is very much interested in regional integration issues, particularly after finishing bilateral FTAs with New Zealand, Singapore. But whether Taiwan is joining TPP or not, it's qualified because it's an APEC member. But of course, and it depends on China's views on it. But recent, well, I don't know, some noise or turmoil in Taiwanese parliament, particularly in terms of the China-Taiwan service trade agreement. I thought free trade is good for the economy, but also for political reasons for Taiwan. But it seems to me the people in Taiwan are not necessarily so much subjective to the sort of the free trade, particularly pushed by big countries. But Japan-Taiwan FTA is still politically difficult, even though Mr. Abe was actually the person who visited Taiwan before he became prime minister. Taiwan really appreciated it. That's why the fishing agreement on Senkaku were done between Mr. Abe and Mr. Ma. So again, politically, Taiwan, Japan could be in a good form, and also a lot of Japanese companies already invested in Taiwan. That could be another case for pushing Japan to consider the bilateral FTAs. Again, that could be the one-way step for Taiwan's engagement in the regional integration. But we hope probably the China-Taiwan should do first. But again, politically, it may be difficult, we just realized. So I'm not so sure how Taiwan can, when Taiwan actually can show we want to join TPP or not officially. So I think it's a very long-term process, it seems to me.
Dr. Shen, you want to add anything about this?
Yeah.
Second questions? No? Okay, yeah. James,
I just have
very
one,
briefly.
I just have one thing to add on top of what Dr. Terada has just pointed out, that if you look at the EU-Korea FTA and also the US-Chorus FTA, it's far more extensive, it's deeper in terms of liberalization in comparison to something like NAFTA, for instance. So, in fact, I've seen some liberalization scores go like 95% liberalization score on Chorus FTA, 98 for the EU ROK FTA. And what that means essentially, when US was trying to coax Korea to join TPP, one of the arguments that they made was that we already have Chorus FTA. Chorus FTA is the template for TPP. Negotiations will be easy. We already have a template. Why not just sign on? Obviously, things have changed when Japan entered the fray. But in fact, one of the arguments that USTR was making was that TPP, the basis or the template for TPP was Chorus FTA. So the Chorus FTA is quite extensive. It's deep.
Yeah, I wish I could continue, but time is up. It's time to conclude and finish the session. Let me conclude by quoting two very well-known remarks. One is done by Francis Fukuyama, one is done by Zbigniew Brzezinski. A year ago, I read the New York Times, Zbigniew Brzezinski, political strategist. He was claiming that in this region, the TPP and RCEP in competition, there might be possibility of leading to very dangerous competition. So he was wishing that the US in RCEP and China in TPP, that was his wish a year ago. But looks like the situation keep changing. Perhaps we're going to see in the end, China and TPP, they're going to end the game. Another quote is Francis Fukuyama, who is very infamous for the end of history. He was saying that in humanity, we have one tragedy. That is, we do cooperative, we do competitive at the same time. But the reason why we try to be cooperative is only to win the competition. I think his foresight is only half truth, because in this economic paradigm, it is win or lose, because this is a win-win paradigm. So in that note, I'd like to conclude the session, and thank you very much for the panelists for sharing your thought. Thank you very much. Thank you.